Okay, so welcome to the alternative part two, um, where we're actually setting up our rendering and rendering a couple of images. And this is mostly going to take place Vray. So the alternative to using Inkscape is to use other rendering engine, Vray. So if you go to Chaos Group, and Vray for Rhino, you can download a free trial of Vray for Rhino. And also, the full version is available on our lab computers. And this software should work on just about anybody's machine. So you're welcome to use it. I actually personally prefer it a little bit to the Enscape, just because it gives you a little bit more control, but obviously for those same reasons, a little bit more involved to use. But we do have a guide. So if you go to capella.arizona.edu, our college's website, and search for the software guidebook, take you to a website called Student Software, and it'll say Software Guidebook. There's a box link, and we can go ahead and just a PDF, so you're welcome to download it. If we go to rendering and we go to Vray, it's actually a step-by-step guide of how to set up a rendering. Vray is mostly what I'm going to go through right now. Okay, so the first thing that you'll want is to load Vray as a rendering engine. So in Rhino, under the render drop-down at the top, go to current renderer and change it into Vray for Rhino. And it'll say set to whatever. And then you should also see at the top drop-down Vray appear. If I click on that, I'm going to go to this thing called Asset Editor. And that's going to be where most of my options are going to show up. Okay, and we actually already have a bunch of stuff in here. I can like hold it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do in here is just do a couple of settings. I'll go to the little gear icon. Now over here I have, under render, I have a couple options, CPU or GPU. For the most part, you'll want to keep it on CPU. I'm going to toggle this interactive to on, because again, that'll be like in Enscape where we can make changes live and see what effect it has on our image. Then I'm going to go to camera. I think by default this will be like 10 or something. Just change it to 14. We can talk about that later when we start rendering. Then I'll go to render output, and I'm going to go to, from the aspect ratio, go to the drop down and click match viewport. And that's going to give me the aspect ratio, my viewport there. You'll also notice the safe frame toggle. That'll like give me like kind of this blue and orange outline that shows me like how my image will be cropped in my viewport. So I'm going to toggle that to on. And then once I go to match viewport, I'm going to switch back to custom. And I have the aspect ratio locked right there. So if I change one number, I should change the other. And again, like in the Enscape video, we're going to set it to a resolution that makes sense for 11 by 17, which is the size of the document this assignment calls for. So if I open up my calculator, remember we always want to work at 150 dpi, or pixels per inch. In other words, if we multiply 150 by whatever size our page is, in this case 17, we're going to get 2,550 pixels. And then that's pretty close. That's what we'll just leave that. That's going to, or we can change it. 150 times 11, 1650. We'd have to unlink these. And you'll notice when I do that, that the cropping boundary changes. Let's just do that because that's what I did in that. Anyway, so that's how we're setting the resolution of our image. For the moment, I am actually going to change it to something lower because I'm going to do a series of test renderings during this video, and I don't want it to take forever. I want to see what I'm doing. Turn it down for now, and I'll turn it back up. Then I'm going to go to my next tab down, which will be my environment. Before I get to anything detailed in environment, we're actually going to create my sun. Now, if you remember, we have the sun that we can edit in Rhino. We want to actually turn that off. So in this asset editor menu, there's a little light bulb icon. We're going to go back to that. And the little icon next to where it says Rhino document sun, I can toggle that sun on or off. And I'm just going to turn it off because we want to actually use a Vray sun. So if we go to our Vray dropdown, Vray lights, get a sunlight. And it's actually going to open up the same exact dialog that we had before with the Rhino sun, but it's going to create a Vray sun object. And so like before, we can kind of set up our sun to, let's just imagine, escape this. Let me just put myself in a view here. So these are the views we made in part 1. I'm going to turn on shadows. Shadows. Oh yeah, I think we need an actual sun object. So once again, we're in Vray lights, sunlight. I'm choosing a location. I'm in Tucson. That's good. And so I'm just going to try and this is east and this way. Maybe I'm trying to get like a little bit of corner light. Late morning. And like that. Maybe a bit of light. And then I can place that object. So I actually need to create an object. I'll just place it anywhere. See, it's actually a little arrow. So that's going to represent, the direction of that arrow is going to represent the direction the sun will be coming. It still isn't picking up on that shadow angle, but that's okay. Let's see it when we start rendering. And you'll also notice that now there's an object in here called sunlight. Toggle it on and off and change some of its parameters in this menu. We expand that dialog to the right. So now that we have a sunlight object created, we're ready to go back and set up our environment. So the first thing we're going to set up is the background. So the background is basically what image are we going to use to show like reflections of the material, particularly our glass, right? Because glass will have a reflective property. I'm going to click on the little checkerboard to the right where it says environment. And that's going to be for me to enter like a custom map basically for that background. If you do see that there's already something in that box, you can right click it and just click clear or something like that. And then it'll turn gray and that'll allow you to set custom one. So we'll click on that. And I'm going to go down to where it says sky. And again, now I'm going to expand my panel to the right. And first thing I'll choose is under sun. I'm just going to set it to sunlight. Okay. And then I'll go back to my settings. So what that'll do, even though it doesn't look like much, is it'll set my sky to change based on however I move my sun angle. So that arrow we just created is also going to create a sky environment, and the sky environment is going to give me my indirect lighting and kind of background. So there's also a couple of other options down here where we see GI stands for global illumination. Like I said, that's my secondary lighting. I'm going to use my sky again. I'm just going to drag this from one checkerboard down to the ones below. It'll open up this dialog and ask me if I want to paste it as a copy or paste it as an instant. I want to paste it as an instant. And what that means is that when I change one of these, they'll all change. Paste it as a copy. I need to change them all independently. I don't want to do it. I'm going to drag that down to each and every one and just click paste as instant each time. So GI, that's going to be our secondary lighting. Background is obviously what we're seeing like beyond our 3D model. Reflection and refraction. Again, that's going to be what shows up through our glass and reflected on our reflective materials. Okay, so now we have kind of all of our general settings established here. And I'm just going to go back to my guide here just to make sure we didn't miss anything. Quality, we made the sun, we made our environment. Yeah, another thing you can do in Rhino is to create a ground plane. Oh yeah, and then we'll get materials. So we can create a ground plane using V-Ray. What I would recommend is you just leave it blank for right now because we're going to do a lot of that stuff in Photoshop. I'm not too worried about a ground plane. But what I do need to do is to set a material up for all the objects in my scene. And like I explained in the other video, I'm mostly just going to leave everything just white, just totally generic, blank, white materials. We don't want to show texture. We don't want to show material. It's more about light, shade, and shadow. So the only material we're really going to set up is going to be our glass. And the glass will be set, or the materials will be set by layer. Look at our layers panel. We'll see that each layer has the option under the material column and set a custom material there. And what we actually want to do is create a material in V-Ray, and we're going to apply it to the objects via their layers. So it's important to organize layers in terms of different materials that you want to use. We'll go back to our asset editor at the top. And then all the way on the left, you're going to see a little circular checkerboard thing. That's going to be our material. So I'm clicking on it right now. Seems like it's giving me the option to create a material. So here, okay, cool. And so that's just going to make a generic material. Over here on the right-hand side, if we have that expanded, I think we can expand to the left. Yeah, so there's a whole library of custom materials already built into our V-Ray. But if we just make a generic material, so in V-Ray, there's a couple different, and actually in a lot of basically most rendering software, there's a couple different like properties you can apply. One of them is often called diffuse, or just the color of the object. In this case, and you can see that's our little preview. That's going to be just like whether it's kind of bright or dark. We can also, of course, click on the little swatch and set a specific color. I'm just going to drag that more or less over to the right so we get a kind of white material. And remember, our renderings are going to be black and white. The color, we just need it to be light or dark. And that's going to act as just the generic white material that I was describing before. The other material, of course, that we want to create is our glass material. So over here on the left, I can expand, go down to where it says glass. And there's a bunch of options. If you want to drag one of those in, I'm going to show you how to create your own, just so you understand how it works. So again, under the drop down, I'm going to go to create, I'm under the material section of the asset editor. Down at the bottom, there's a little circle with a plus sign where it says create asset. And I'm going to create a material. And again, I'm just going to call it generic. Just some basic settings. And this one, I'll rename it just by double clicking, call it my glass. Now I'm going to ignore the diffuse channel because once I set up everything else, it actually won't matter. I'm going to expand the reflection channel. So basically the reflection color is going to affect where the object is reflective and by how much. So I have two options. Basically, the reflection color is going to affect how reflective my object is overall. White is going to be totally reflective. Black is going to be not reflective at all. And then if we go to glossiness, we have another slider between 0 and 1. You can see that a glossiness of 1 is going to produce very, very sharp reflections. Then as we drag it down, we're going to get duller reflection, which kind of mimics the surface finish of different materials. So glass, as we know, is pretty smooth, pretty reflective. We're going to keep it pretty high, 0.95 or 1. And then I'm not going to mess with anything else, so I'll just click that little arrow. The next drop down I'll go to is refraction. And so reflection obviously means the way that light is like reflected off the surface. Refraction means the way that light moves through a material or moves through a surface. And so if we want to set our refraction up, we're going to go down here. Again, we can drag that refraction bar over to the right, just like we did with our glass, or sorry, with our reflection layer. And you can see we have a property where the object is kind of clear and is refracting light in the way that like a piece of glass would. And just like before, in reflection, we have a option for glossiness, and that's going to make us, if we wanted to do like a frosted glass, it's going to affect like how sharp the refractions are that are coming through that material. So I'm going to drag it all the way over to the right, and that's it. Now I'm ready. So I have a reflection and a refraction set to the maximum, and you can see now that whatever I do to the diffuse channel doesn't really change how this material looks. Okay, and now I'm ready to apply those materials to my layers. I'm actually just going to do them all at the same time, so I'm going to hold Shift and select all the layers, holding Control and clicking on my glazing because I want to set that to a different one. And then I'll click where it says we're under the material channel, and I'll go to the drop down. Well, you should see an option to set it to Vray in here. It depends on which version of Vray you have. I'm not seeing an option. So the other way we could do it, rather than applying it by layer, I think, maybe I just have a version of like got a bug in it where I'm not getting that V-Ray option in here when I drop down. So you should see an option, and then once you do that, you'll be able to select from either the generic, which is our white material, or the glass. In my case, I'm just going to assign material by objects. In order to do it to all the objects, I'll just right-click on them, go to Select Objects. And so now I've selected everything on those layers that I apply that generic to. I'm going to Properties, and I'm going to the little tube of paint looking icon. And then I can click from the drop-down. Okay, get in there either. But I think, so yeah, if we go back to our V-Ray asset editor, yeah, you might not see it in there either, but if we go back to our V-Ray asset editor, and we're clicking on generic, and I'm right-clicking, and while I have all those objects selected, I can go to Apply to Selection, and that should apply that generic to that selection. Okay, and then I'll deselect everything, select my glazing layer, right-click, select Objects, and again, I'm going to go to my glass, right-click, Apply to Selection. It is better, it's just better to use V-Ray materials when you're doing a rendering of V-Ray. Gives you a lot better results. Okay, so now that we have our materials applied, we're kind of ready to do a test rendering. So I'm going to go back to my named views panel. Again, I wanted to mention in this video as well, because I forgot in the first video, what you want to do is kind of set up these views and then choose where to add detail, a certain amount of detail in your 3D model. So like you might want to just choose the model window frames in the exact perspective that you're going to model in, or sorry, render in. Otherwise, you may find it not as critical to do. Okay, so then I'm going back over to my asset editor, going to my gear, and I have a little button up at the top that looks like a teapot with a hand on it. And that's going to be my option to start a rendering. So I'm going to click on that. Okay, so there it popped up. I'll give it a second. It's thinking. Okay, so we got that working. One of the things that might find is that seems like V-Ray does not like to be. You may have to set up some There we go. And so, like I said, everything that I'm doing in Rhino, my V-Ray window. Okay, cool. So there's my interactive view, and everything I do in terms of lighting and environment will be reflected there. So if I go in, stop this, and basically what you want to do is once you have your kind of rendering set up where you want it, I'll do another one here really quick. So also, yeah, if you do want to change the angle of your sun, one thing you can do is I like to just make multiple suns over here in the lights panel in the V-Ray asset editor, and I can just turn them on and off per scene, which scene I'm doing. But you can also click on the sun object, the little arrow thing, and in the properties panel under light, click edit. I'll take you back to that dialog where you can angle. Okay, and just be mindful that the placement of this arrow won't matter, but the angle of it will matter. So if I angle a little bit, swivel it up vertical. Actually, you know what? Let me do a low angle. That'll work. I'm gonna do a really low, say kind of early morning. Okay. And then I'll click render again. And there we go. One of the other things that I wanted to mention that you may run into if you're using V-Ray is that sometimes when you have glass materials that don't have a thickness, V-Ray can get a little bit confused. So all you have to do, if your glass surfaces, for example, don't have thickness, is in Rhino, select those objects and just use the command offset surf. Make sure you turn the option solid to yes. I'm going to say 1/2 inch. Doesn't have to be really thick. And then see what that kind of. So I'm not really getting any issues, but sometimes people will see like issues where glass will turn black, especially when you're looking through a couple different windows, like through a space and stuff like that. Or you might also see the refractions look a little bit funky. So one of the things to try is going to be to add a thickness to the glass. Now, when I'm ready to render, what I can do is I'm going to stop this render just by clicking that button. I can also stop it with the stop sign up at the top right. And when I'm ready to render, oh yeah, well, one thing I wanted to mention is here in my asset editor under camera, that number we changed right at the beginning is going to be the primary way that we adjust our brightness or darkness. So you can see as I'm moving that slider around, basically changing like, as if this was a camera, maybe we're changing the exposure of it, everything like that. I found that 14 is usually pretty balanced, unless you're having a different kind of a scene where there's different lighting effects and stuff like that. The other thing you can do is under the sunlight. So we talked a little bit about sharpness of shadows in the other video. One thing we can do here, oh yeah, up at the top where it says size multiplier, if I make my sun really big, that's basically the best way to start to get some softer shadows. Simulate like a, and I can also just type in this box if I wanted to make it. And you can see that the kind of sharpness of those shadows is beginning to get more diffuse, as if it were, cloudy day or something. But again, because we're trying to represent that kind of sharper sunlight, we'll leave it at 1. Of course, we can also turn strength of it up or down relative to skylight, that intensity slider. Okay. And then back over here, when I'm ready to render, I'm going to go to Render Output, Settings. I'm going to turn it back up to 2550. And then I can go up to where it says Render. And if you want to, you can turn it off of Interactive. You can also adjust quality here. That'll change kind of how fast it'll go, or if there's certain errors that show up or not. And you can click the little render icon. And if you do that with the Interactive turned off, what you'll find is that but anyway, what you'll find is that the rendering will go through a process. You can actually click this little icon down here where it says Show the Vray Messages window. That'll give you a progress bar, and then it'll kind of render pixel by cube the view. So that's one way to render like a final image. And but I kind of prefer just to leave it on interactive. And so, but it does actually change a little bit resolution. So you'd have to tweak the camera exposure to get it to look right. But anyway, so you can leave it on interactive, and basically it'll just continue to refine and refine. You just have to remember not to move your viewport or make any changes, but just allow it to get more and more refined. And then up here at the top where it says follow mouse, I can actually click that little icon. And what that'll do is you can see wherever I place my mouse, it'll start to get better and better quality video working right around there. So if I'm trying to focus kind of how refined my image is getting in certain areas, I can use that tool. You may not need quite as much resolution in these other areas, but then it'll gradually kind of get more refined. So I'm going to let this run for a minute or two. Come back. Okay, so you can see it's gotten a lot more refined, and I could let it go a little bit longer. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and stop it, and then I can go ahead and save. So that save on up top. Under save as type, I want to save it to .png, and I'll save it to, call this my, what do I call it, collective. Now, when I save the image, you can see that it should already have the kind of sky cropped out. The only thing that is different is, like, if you're looking at sky through a piece of glass, or background through a piece of glass, it won't be cropped out. There is a kind of a quick way to fix that. Let me just do another rendering, better example. Okay, so if we go to this view and hit render, you can see there's my view. And if I were to, I can save this, see what I mean. Save it as PNG. Wait a second. You can see it's only cropping out the background in areas where I'm looking at an opening, not where I'm looking through the glass. So there's a kind of a tricky way to fix that. I go to my asset editor, go to the material, go to the glass. First of all, there's a slider up here, you'll see, next to where it says the little add layer plus sign. And I want to, where it says switch to advanced settings, I want to turn that on. And then what I want to do is go under refraction, and under where it says affect channels, I'm going to change it to color, from color only to color plus alpha. Here rendering restart because we made a change to our material. And so now if I were to save it, I mean, Give that a second to work. And there you go. So now we should be able to easily insert a background even areas where we're looking through glass. Okay, so that should be the conclusion of this tutorial. Again, moving on to the next tutorial, we're going to talk about how to export the other layers, like the line drawing, and then compose everything in Illustrator and Photoshop. So make sure you save each of your renderings out, and then we'll talk about composition in the next video. I will